Okay, so we move to the next session, open source business models, monetization and reduce risk, sorry. The session chairman is Burgess Cooper, who's the partner, information and cyber security, EY India. And the speakers are Damien Horner, VP Engineering, Scan and SCA, Contrast Security, Mohit Rampal, CEO Founder, Ramonji Technologies, Prasanna Lohar, Head Technology, Digital Innovation and Architecture, DCB Bank Limited, Madam Mitali Sharma, Head Risk, Compliances and Information Security, SDG Software India Limited. Burgess, over to you.
Hi, thank you, Shashi. Should we first begin with the individual presentations from each of them, or do we go straight for the roundtable conference?
No, we'll go the individual presentations to start with
Sure.
Horner first, then Mohit, then Prasanna, and then we'll in the end we will go for a panel discussion.
Absolutely, thank you, Shashi. So welcome, fellow panelists. We had superb introduction sessions earlier in the morning. Great inputs from Sumati Patyagi, from Jeff. Lovely roundtable moderation by Harnath. Now we look forward to the second session. I'll request Damien Horner to start with his first presentation, followed by Mohit, Prasanna, Mitali, and then we'll have the roundtable discussion. Over to you, Damien Horner. Shashi, can you invite Damien to start, please?
Thank you. I'm having trouble turning on my video. It tells me that I'm unable to.
Ranjit, you need to give him permission to share a screen.
So I'll go ahead and try and share my screen. It won't let me turn on my video, but hopefully you'll be able to see what I'm about to share here. Could someone confirm that they can see my slide?
Yes, we can, Damien.
Excellent, thank you.
It has happened before, it will happen again.
It has indeed. So hi everyone. I'm delighted to be speaking with you here today. I would love to discuss the recent Log4j vulnerability and talk about what we as a company learned, how we responded to that news, and also how we responded and acted as a trusted advisor with our customers as they went through the same thing. So a little bit about me. Why am I speaking to you here today? Well, I live in Belfast in Northern Ireland. I am the VP of Engineering for Contrast Security. And Contrast, as you've probably already gathered, we're an application security software vendor. So my role is to manage teams of developers, and we're creating a broad set of products in the market. And I personally have been a developer my whole life, practically. I've been interested in writing code and developing software ever since I was a child. At Contrast, we're building this security platform, and our customers are mostly medium and large enterprises with their own in-house software development teams. And our products fit into each part of the developer pipeline. And my responsibility, as you look at the different product names that we have there, my responsibility is for the Scan and SCA products, the two that are on the left. So essentially, we're producing a wide range of software in the security space, and we sell to a wide variety of customers. So when the news about Log4j first broke, we had to react on our own behalf, taking care of our own production systems, etc. But we also had to stand shoulder to shoulder with our customers. They were turning to us for advice and guidance on what to do next. You can see on this slide here the 5 products that we have represented, running from left to right, as they would in a developer pipeline. Scan on the left-hand side with its pipeline native static analysis, and SCA, most importantly for open source libraries, and then right through to our Protect product, which is operating in production and preventing zero-day exploits. So they're all very relevant to taking care of your open source libraries. And it's a subject that's very close to my heart. When you think about open source, or let's talk about open source a little bit, I like this image here. It matches what was said just a few minutes ago by Jeff about 3 people maintaining the Log4j library. There are so many large enterprises that have built their fortunes on top of open source libraries. And really, many times we don't know what's inside the libraries, which parts of our applications have them included, and within the libraries, which parts are actually being used. Those are listed on the slide. There are some of the common issues. Things like vulnerabilities in libraries become public knowledge immediately. And once they are disclosed, it really is a race against time. There are entire ecosystems that have been set up to help hackers become productive more quickly and to weaponize vulnerabilities in libraries. So when you use a popular open source library, you get all the benefits of someone else having written that functionality in advance, and you save yourself so much time. But you also add yourself to a potential target list should anything be discovered in the library. So you have to be aware of the risk that goes with it. We also mentioned earlier on the discussion panel about some of the other issues, things like developers not really being worried about trying to implement secure coding, and it's because they're not incentivized to. There's no warranty. There's no one to complain to if something goes wrong. Let me see. I've been told that I can start my video, and hopefully you can now see me. Just one second. So there's this basic lack of security. There's no warranty. There's no integrations oversight. There are quite a few different problems that go with all the benefits. And really, at the end of the day, unpaid developers will often write code in the quickest and least rigorous way possible. So we can get all these benefits, but we should just be aware of them as we use open source. Regarding Log4j, it was first discovered last December early in the month, and I think it's going to rattle around for quite a few years. It's a remote execution vulnerability in the popular Java logging library. If you use Java at all, then chances are you needed to react to this in some way. In this image, you can see on the right-hand side the representation of Log4j just stomping all over security teams' holiday plans around the world. But we shouldn't be surprised by this. There's nothing new here. We've seen it before. Vulnerabilities like Heartbleed, which is a bug in OpenSSL, Shell Shock, the Drown attack, where SSL v3 could be effectively downgraded. We know this has happened before. It's going to happen again. And the real question is, how prepared and able to react will you be? So when this news broke, that image there that I found, there's a lot of images for Log4j on the internet when you search for them. And this one shows the guy standing at a party and everyone else is enjoying themselves, but they don't know what's going on. And that was really me last Christmas. And I'm sure many of you and many of your development teams were in the same sort of position, checking for Slack messages to see what was happening and what the latest news was, while everyone else was completely unaware. For my own experiences, over the course of the previous year, because of the pandemic and everyone working at home, Contrast Security had been kind enough to give all of our staff multiple extra days of annual leave. And many of my team members had built up this extra holiday. And as we were approaching the end of the year, they wanted to make sure that they used it. So many of them were taking an extended break. So as a development team, we were ramping down. Most people were at home. Most people were on holidays. And the immediate response within the company was to declare an incident, bring teams back from vacation, and begin the process of checking and patching where necessary. And this had to happen very, very quickly. Everyone was working off hours to validate our position and correct any usages, however small. But at the same time, we were providing guidance to our customers. and we were listening to their concerns, and we were giving them informed security research. We even made some minor product improvements based upon feedback that they were giving us. So we had two approaches there: deal with our own problems and make sure we weren't at risk, and then also give guidance to customers. We were seeing seeing it from both sides. So given that we know this is going to happen again, what did we learn? You can't ever really say that you have no vulnerabilities. It would be naive to say that, because you don't know what vulnerabilities there are in these libraries. So the real question is, what can you do to prepare and be ready for the next time? Can you as a company react quickly enough? Do you have the information at your fingertips that you need? Can you demonstrate after the dust settles that you took action and prove that? And are there any further measures that could help you to mitigate the problem the next time around? So I'm going to walk through those one by one. When I talk about reacting, I'm really referring to two separate areas. The first is dealing with the incident itself, and then the second is making the fixes or patches available. So as developers, we may not be thinking this, but you need to ask yourself, what is your incident response procedure? Do the right people in your company know their responsibilities? In a situation where a production environment or a company reputation or infrastructure is at risk, do you have the guidance that defines the criticality of the incident? These procedures don't necessarily feel intuitive or that important in the day-to-day business, but I can tell you that they are very important when something like this happens. For example, when I called my people on Friday evening, they were on their holidays. It was a weekend, and I told them, we have a critical incident here. They knew exactly what to expect. They knew that there would be hourly communications, that there would be an incident commander would be appointed to deal with this. They knew there would be Slack channels for working conversations. So all of that incident response is extremely important. And then the second, also very, very important piece is, how are your engineering processes? How easy is it to make a fix and deploy it to production? How confident are you in the validity of a hurried code change? Do you have the right level of automated testing that allows you to crank the handle and push something out and know with confidence that that you're not going to break something in production? We had to be able to turn around minor changes, thankfully for us, just small incremental updates to the library here and there. But we had to turn those changes around and get them into production for our live customers within the period of an hour or two. It would have been nice if we could do it faster than that. But I do know that by about 8:30 p.m. on the Friday, having called the guys around 5, we were wrapping our incident up and telling them it's all good. And that's because we had our incident response training in place, and we also had really good code practices that allowed us to push code to production very quickly. The next thing is, do you know what's inside your applications? That's what I meant when I wondered if you have all the information at your fingertips. Many companies, thankfully not our customers really, had no way to work out if they were using a certain library. And if they were using it, they didn't know what versions they were using. So when this vulnerability became public knowledge, leadership teams around the world were looking for a single dashboard to describe their total open source exposure. They wanted clear guidance on which libraries they were using. And that information is not always easy to collect, because different teams have different build procedures, and what is in a development build in one environment may not necessarily be the same as what went into the production build. So you need to make sure that you have the capabilities to document and prove and easily access what libraries are in your builds. And things like SBOM capabilities, that can certainly help a lot in your SCA tools. That would allow you to immediately check exactly what went into a specific build of any application. Another layer here is, do you have runtime visibility? I think really in terms of 3 maturity levels here. The first being, we don't know what libraries we're using without spending quite a bit of time to do some research. And the next level is, we do know what libraries we include in our builds, but we don't really know what parts of those libraries we're using. And then the third level is, we fully understand what is in any build and which parts of those libraries are used at runtime, and we can quickly access that information if we need to deal with something like Log4j. Everything's fine until you get a call from the CISO saying, give me a list of the applications which are using this library. I need to know immediately so that I can address the board about this. That's the kind of situation that you have to be able to react quickly to. Regarding your security advice, you have to ask yourself, do you have current and unambiguous and clear security guidance? Sometimes for all of us, security bulletins can be confusing, and we don't fully understand something. If we don't fully understand something, then it's easier to just simply discard it and ignore it and not pay attention to it because it doesn't make complete sense to you. So you need to know that your security guidance is accurate, it's up to date, and it's not sensational in its nature. As this vulnerability was rolling out and people were becoming aware of it, new versions were being created for the library. CVE details were being updated on public platforms, but they were being updated too slowly for our customers. So companies like Contrast and others in this market were performing our own internal validation, and we were creating our own CVE vectors around this vulnerability in order to make sure that customers get the latest and most accurate data. And you need to be thinking about this for yourself. Where do you get your security guidance? And do you understand it? And can you take action if there is a change to it? The immediate reaction when something like this happens is to simply switch out the library. I say simply, the immediate reaction is to remove the library at fault in all production applications. That's what you want to do, but often you're constrained by time or resources. It may not be possible to do that, but you should remember that it may not actually be necessary. Many of the SCA products in the market were severely over-reporting the issue, because simply looking at dependencies in your build, it will tell you if the library has been packaged, but it won't tell you if it is actually being used. So you should think if you can accurately tell which classes within a library are being used in your production environments. In the data that we have from the time after the discovery, 58% of Java applications packaged a vulnerable version of Log4j. 58% included the library, but only 37% actually used it. So that's 21%, 1/5 of all the applications that people were dealing with over the course of those couple of weeks. They didn't actually need to be updated. I mean, you probably want to, you probably feel that you should, but they didn't have to be because the vulnerable code wasn't being used. And finally, this one seems kind of obvious, but when a library has been updated, can you actually verify quickly and easily that the change made it into production? Do you have a way to do real-time audits of your production systems to validate what's running within them? Build files are fine to tell what's in a build, but I've seen quite a few instances where the build file that is stored as the record for a build of an environment doesn't actually match what's going into production, because the build file is being taken from a test or an integration system, and that might have included additional code that doesn't actually end up being deployed. So if at all possible, you should think about doing runtime instrumentation, and then you're guaranteed to get the accurate list of what is actually running, because that's what you're looking at. SBOM files in particular actually have been a useful incremental update that help in this area for getting a good understanding of what's inside any particular build. So to wrap it up, having been through this from both sides, here's my checklist for preparing for the next time. Incident response. You need to have good practices, tools, and the ability to deploy. Build transparency. You got to get quick and easy access to your builds for all applications and all environments. Security guidance. You need to be thinking about your security guidance. Is it reliable? Is it up to date? Not sensational. Runtime usage. The libraries can contain a lot of functionality which you don't ever use, and vulnerabilities come up inside that code. But if you don't need to fix it, then you don't need to fix it if you don't use it. And fix verification. Can you prove what has actually been done after the fact? Can you demonstrate to your stakeholders that you made the fix and it is no longer a problem? And lastly, runtime protection. Runtime protection products have the ability to intercept and block vulnerability types live in production. And as a result, customers with that type of solution deployed, they were already protected from remote code execution vulnerabilities like Log4j, even when it was a 0-day and nobody knew about it. So when the announcement came out, they could rest easy knowing that they needed to fix it, they needed to deal with it, but they weren't in any immediate danger. So I'll wrap up on that point, really. I don't know if there's the opportunity for questions. I think I've run on by a couple of minutes. It should go without saying that the suite of products that Contrast makes can help in all of these areas. But those were our learnings, or the things that we discovered, or that we found out, or that we would recommend in dealing with open source the next time Log4j comes along, or something similar, because it will come along, and we should expect it.
Damon, I'll ask the questions to you as part of the group discussion. That will be good to get that.
Okay, perfect. I shall stop sharing.
Thank you so much. Sure.
Thank
Let's
you.
go on the next speaker, please. Sashi. Yeah, we can start.
Yeah, can you hear me? Good morning.
Yes,
Good
we can.
afternoon all.
Yeah, Mohit, we can. We can hear you and see your handsome face. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. It's a good afternoon, and thank you, Shashi, and thank you, everyone. And I think that was a very great session, hearing from Jeff and Damien, and then doctors were there. Two of the doctors were there, Bharat and Sudarshan. So nice hearing them, in terms of the security and open source. So quickly, we're just going to talk about a little bit about the securing a supply chain, and that was a question I think even Deepa ma'am and Dr. Narendran also mentioned out here in the morning, that's very, very important going forward as we start consuming and utilizing the open source, right? So it's very important to secure your open chain, your supply chain on the open source compositions, and it's important. The reason being is that the Log4j, which is another one of the vulnerabilities exposed recently, that's important because if you don't know what you're going to be defending against, what are you going to fight for? So it's important to have that. So we're just going to concentrate a couple of slides on this. Just to give you a market dynamics, what's happening across. So, I'm going back to 2013 and 14, when the Heartbleed activity actually got a lot of focus on open source adoption and the 0-day vulnerability, right? Because that was an OpenSSL vulnerability discovered in 2013-14. And now what we are seeing right now is the consumption of open source and adoption is happening at a very fast pace. Now, the go-to-market for organizations is typically to use a quick open source component. We are also a developer in terms of creating products, and we do depend on the open source consumption. So we look at a couple of aspects, and that's one of the use cases we are going to talk about, how we are trying to secure our supply chain to ensure that we don't fall into the same trap again and again. Not only is the adoption of open source going up, but also are the vulnerabilities. Now, a couple of slides down the line, I'm going to share exactly that, how the number of vulnerabilities are increasing also in the open source, because people are spending time, not only to figure out the consumption, but also to figure out what are the ones, or the hackers are looking at focused, dedicated attacks. The next important point to understand out here is, I'm so sorry, my screen just went off. I'm sorry. Yes. So the next important point to understand is the components, the number of components. I remember Jeff talking about there are more than 37 million projects available, right, which are there in the market, right, now, which are being consumed, right. Then the number of risks which are exposed and unexposed, that's undeclared, right. So that's something we keep on fighting. It's a continuous attack which is happening right now. Securing left and securing a supply chain and shifting left, that's what's more important. As we talk about DevSecOps, organizations globally are moving from DevOps to DevSecOps. So it's important to move also to with the traffic and start ensuring that you are you're deploying your security processes in early stage rather than later stage. So as an organization internally also, we have actually deployed DevSecOps internally. That means before we even start developing, we actually look into the bill of material before we get a commit from the developers in terms of the requirement sheets. The type of cyber attacks have also increased in terms of focused cyber attacks. It's no longer like a random attack. So you've got those APTs working specifically on certain domains. And they're also focusing, if people work on the darknet, you'll be able to understand that certain organizations or certain state-sponsored terrorists are looking at attacks dedicated to certain domains like financial or power, etc. Whatever is consuming open source also, they are dedicating those attacks very quickly. Log4j is an example of a zero-day attack, which we were just talking about. I think Jeff and Damien gave a pretty strong example and pretty strong information about how those can be mitigated and how we can do that. And last but not least is the use of APIs. We see a lot of dynamics which is happening on the utilization and usage of APIs being consumed. Open source also. So I'm not just talking about open source consumption of software components. I'm also talking about consumption of open source APIs. There are a lot of third-party APIs or open source APIs which are being consumed. That needs to be also looked into because of the fact that they also pose a very huge security risk for organizations. Just to give you a statistics, like we shared about 37 million projects we're talking about. This is a brief on the description about the breakup of technologies and how the ecosystem is broken up, right? If you see the second last column, it says the vulnerability density for utilized vector versions, right? If you see that 29% of the vulnerabilities are on this area. So you can actually see that the quantum of people who are spending time on ensuring that they're looking at the open source components is increasing. It's no longer that it's open source, I don't need to worry about it, we need to worry about it. The other important point, I'm just picking up from what Jeff left and what Damien and Dr. Devrupta and Sudarshan mentioned, was that how is open source being consumed? I heard Deepa ma'am talking about the RAN network. So we also looked into the RAN networks. A lot of open source is being consumed in those applications in the 5G environment or typically creating the open RAN, right? That's important. Sorry, yeah. The other important thing is we're looking at legacy software, legacy supply chain. So you do have a legacy amount of software which is being consumed, right? Equifax is a live example which happened a couple of years ago, I think 2017, 16, 17, that happened across. That was an eye-opener again on where the focus started moving on the SCA or the supply chain automation, or I would say the composition analysis, software composition analysis. The other important aspect which we're looking at on the statistics, if you can look into it, is like I shared 37 million projects, right? You look at the download volume, it's in terabytes, right? You can see the number of volume in doing that. The other important thing is the increase in the download growth is 73%. It's increasing year on year. So dependency on software development organizations from being custom software development to using a lot of open source has increased. A live example is we have around 2 products. One of them is on a cyber incident management system. And we are utilizing quantum of open source for a lot of delivery activities. For example, the entire library or entire, let's say, charts which we are trying to create on statistics, right? We're using a lot of open source components again in consumption because of the fact that that makes us deployment much more quicker as compared to writing a raw code and then try to create a simple thing, because the quantum of people contributing to the open source is far higher as compared to to an organization like if you stick onto one proprietary technology. So open source is there to stay. Open source is there to expand. Open source is there to help organizations grow quicker. And so, of course, it also gets across the number of vulnerabilities. You need to get prepared and protected against that. We looked at a couple of reports, and the 3 most common OSS attacks in the last couple of years have been dependency confusion, typo squatting, and malicious source code injections. Now, what do we mean by dependency, right? So, I spent a couple of years in a company which was focused on open source, and there we understood a lot of open source and what do you mean by dependency? So there could be a component which would have a multiple dependency inbuilt inside a package, right? So what do hackers do? They look at the bad actors or hackers, they look at the dependency, and they're trying to create a similar version or same name on that and push it to a public repository, right? So what happens as a developer? The developer picks up the same component without realizing that this particular component could result in a security vulnerability. So this is one of the examples. I think we'll have some discussions around that later. Then you're looking at typo squatting. Again, typo squatting means just like you have typo squatting on the website, you also have typo squatting coming on the open source components. What do we mean by that? It's like, for example, we may be talking about a certain component, let's say Node.js, or let's say Spring Boot, for example, right? So by a small typo error, we pick up another component which is more or less sounding the same or naming the same, but it's actually a vulnerable component, right? This is important to understand, that we need to be clear about how we create that. Next, which is on the malicious source code, right? So what happens is, who knows about this malicious source code injection? Nobody except the person who's injected it. That's one of the biggest worries you can look into it in terms. So what do we mean by that, right? We're looking at stealing of credentials, and then what do we do? Once we have stolen the credentials, we actually push that across, inject a small piece of malicious code into the component, and that's it. So what happens? Only the person who has pushed it realizes the injection attack is there. But people like us who are on the development side, it'll take a long time if you don't have a secure supply chain mechanism to discover the open source consumption and clearing it. Now, this is actually my last slide, and I'm going to spend a couple of minutes on this, pretty close. And I'm looking at references which I heard from Jeff, I heard from Damien, I heard from Dr. Nayak, Sudarshan, and the other panelists, right? They were talking about how do we secure the open source. Now, the most important thing is you need to have a complete, clear-cut CI/CD integration or a DevSecOps integration into consumption of open source. I'll give you a simple story about how we do it in our organization. So when we started creating this project or this product around four years ago, the first thing I did, because I had spent some couple of years in an open source company, right? So the first thing I did was ask my developers to create a detailed bill of material as to what are the typical components they may be consuming. Now, I'll give you a small example which you can correlate to your organizations too. Whenever you ask a developer, why are you using this particular open source component? His answer normally is, you know what, I've been using this in my previous organization, so I'm using this. That's the most common answer I have come across when I ask developers about the component which they're consuming. Now, this has to go back to the security team to go and validate into looking at two aspects of security, right? One is the security risk, meaning, is this particular component, does it have any security vulnerability associated with it or not? That's important because, like Jeff was talking about, and Damien just right now was mentioning about, is the three people who are involved under Log4j, right? Now, just look at the example that because this developer is using a Log4j, which is, let's say, 1.0x, and the new developer who is joined in is using a 1.1x, and somebody in the middle is using another, and so on. Look at the amount of quantum of work which an organization will need to do during a move and change. Because some of the features in the 1.0x may not be available in the latest version. So there is a move and change requirement too. Technically, yes, because it has to go through the process. And the time to mitigate that attack will become larger and larger. So what do we need to do? So what we did is, we actually looked at the list of the bill of material. The security team actually validated using, let's say, we used the software composition analysis of contrast, and we validated the entire bill of material to figure out what are the components we have and how vulnerable are they, and what are the latest versions which are available. We went back to the developers and told them, these are the versions which you need to look into and work on with the latest versions. That was the first thing we did to mitigate a future cyber risk. Second is the code rot or the operational risk. Now, it's important to understand the code rot or operational risk is the fact is, there is no fun to use a component which was created 2.5 or 3 years ago. I heard Deepa ma'am also mentioning earlier in the conversations that, that code has been there for around 2.5, 4 years, 5 years, but there have been no code contributors. This is an important point because if there is nobody contributing to the code right now, then how would the development team be able to fix up a vulnerability which gets exposed? So it's important to look at these two aspects in while consuming or utilizing open source, is the security risk and the age of the code which you're using. It's always advisable, like Damien just mentioned, use the latest version to mitigate your risk much more quicker. So you need to keep on adapting it. So you need to have a repo, which is your own repo. You can use any of the third-party repos available and ensure that your security team or your development team works in conjunction to keep on updating the components required. The other important aspect we also made is that we actually deployed VPNs across our organization and did not allow any developer to use a component which was not there available on our public, on our repo, which we had created internally. The reason being is the developers will just go around and start copying code from anywhere in the world. And that gets into the next security risk is, can I have a process wherein I can ensure that the developer is using only the components which have been approved by the security team to be consumed? So we put that policy enforcement in place. Third, we have actually deployed contrast into our practical scenario, wherein every time we have on the dev stage or on the QA stage, the entire composition is actually, the entire software code is vetted completely from end to end. We not only look at the interactive, the security testing, but we also look at the SCA portion of our software. Why? Because this SCA portion is able to help us to figure out what was the component version and names we started while we were working when we started. So for example, the developer, when we started the project, we had close to around 200 odd components. But by the time we came into the QA stage, we had around 300 components, right? So we were in a position to figure out the difference in these additional 100 and when they got added into the development lifecycle. And did they follow the process? So we were able to mitigate majority of our risk at a very early stage, which means our cost to obtain or create our product went down drastically lower because of the fact that we were deploying a process which has been approved like one of the good processes in the DevSecOps platform. And last but not the least, our projects are continuously monitored. The reason we need to monitor it is, just like Damien mentioned, Log4j came across. We as Contrast were also looking into it, right? Internally, have we been affected? Same we did at Ramogini. We looked into the aspect of figuring out, are we using the right process? Do we have any Log4j vulnerabilities? Now, because we were continuously being monitoring our solution on Contrast, we were able to figure out what came in, what is the latest version, and we were able to fix it up. So the time from discovery of the open source to fixing it up for us drastically went down, which in turn is actually helping us out. And last but not the least, why do we need to have a policy deployment? You need to have strong policies, like Damien was also mentioning earlier. We need to have policies which are actually helping the organization to look into open source. This is my last, that's it. I think I'm open for questions post the session. Over to you, Bharat.
Thanks a lot, Mohit. Appreciate. If you can get our next speaker, please. Sashi. If you can.
That's Prasanna.
Yep. Prasanna, can you sort of display your contents and
After
take the
Prasanna
next
is
session?
Mitali. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Prasanna, you're there? Hi, Prasanna. Mitali, are you ready? Maybe you can go first and then Prasanna can follow.
Sure, no worries.
Thank you. In the meantime, somebody can call Prasanna and ask him to be ready. Go ahead, Mitali.
Yep. Are you able to see me?
Thank you.
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Okay. I'll just share my screen. Just let me know. So are you able to see the presentation now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so I'll just get started. So first of all, thanks a lot, Bharat Exhibitions and Shashi for inviting me here as a speaker. It's always an honor to be part of any events associated with Bharat Exhibitions. Thanks, Burgess, for having us here. And I'll quickly start with my topic. The topic that I'm going to talk about is open source for the cloud, understanding and mitigating risks. So I'll start with some of the statistics. And if you look over here, some of the reports show that 25% of the organizations don't even know what is their cloud security status. And some of the organizations rate that misconfiguration of cloud platform is what is the key towards making them more cyber theft, more towards their cyber theft. And these misconfigurations, some of them have resulted in serious server downtimes, and on an average, it's resulted in a loss of about $9,000. Some other surveys talk about the open source, the use of open source in literally in every application, in every industry. If we look at the Verizon breach investigation report, we would know that cloud security and compromise of cloud credentials has been one of the keys towards the breaches that have come across. Even the basic web application attacks, they have been using stolen credentials, they have been using cloud. So that's one of the areas where it is heading towards. So cloud security, open source, and the breaches. And in general, that's how the cloud model looks like. We have some characteristics, and this is based on the NIST standard. We have certain service models, and the organizations would subscribe to cloud service in one of these service models. And in any of these, open source has become the key. So the latest trend is that the use of software components, open source, that has gone up to 90%. From databases to mobile applications. It is like using open source anywhere with the cloud computing. Why we use open source? Because it is generally free. It is like, it is scalable. It is less costly. You don't have so much licensing fees associated with it, and is easy to manage and customize. Some things which are easy to customize, they come with their own risks and challenges. And one of the things that we see are the cyber attacks. And a lot of people have already, a lot of speakers before me have already spoken about it. I think that's the key. There have been a lot of cyber attacks over the years due to certain stolen credentials, due to data leakage, due to insider thefts. So these are some of the statistics for it. One of the key challenges with open source and cloud computing is data theft. So if we look again at some of the statistics, we would see that 62% of them said that data privacy was their challenge. Data theft was one of the challenges for 64% people. And the problem was that, there was a risk of data theft, leak, compromise of data. And just to ensure that all of it is safe, people really need to think whether they have the right resources to do it. Do they have the right service provider, the cloud service provider? And that's where data leakage became the key challenge. The second key challenge that is associated with cloud computing and open source is the insecure interfaces and APIs. We've seen, and Mohit also spoke about it, that whether it is authentication, access control, encryption, activity monitoring, all of these are very easily hackable. There are APIs that are used within the applications. They are used within the cloud environment. They are used in the open source. So, people use it just because they are free, but they don't care whether it is secure or not. And that's the reason why rigorous penetration testing, that's something which should definitely be there, along with certain specific code reviews. Software vulnerabilities and fixes. We do use open source because we feel that it is quick, easy to use. It is publicly available. We have community support, but we should also think that when it is freely available, when the fixes are displayed on the website, then it is definitely exploitable by hackers as well. Security considerations in open source software, like I spoke about, we don't tend to think about the security implications, the legal implications, what kind of security is built into the software, how frequently the software is using third parties, how frequently your data is moving from your application to the other application. So that's the reason why we tend to ignore this. Misconfigurations in the cloud environment itself, there have been many misconfigurations because of which the cloud data has been compromised. Some places we would leave the unrestricted access. The cyber criminals or the hackers can easily take care of. They can just exploit these protocols. They can take unauthorized access. They can go on and have that kind of outbound connections, and they can take up your data. And that leads to the lack of access controls, like I spoke about. It is very critical that when you are having your cloud environment, when you are using any open source within cloud environment or any environment, you have proper identity and access management. If you fail to implement that, then the data can be hackable, the application can be hackable. They can easily come into your network, and they can take care of your systems, and all your data, privileges, all of that can get lost. And with that, the account hijacking can take place. And with remote working coming into picture, with people moving from on-prem to cloud, and people moving from on-prem infrastructure to remote working, this is something that has happened. I mean, how many of you would have seen O365 accounts hacked in your organizations? As well as, we also keep getting these phishing emails where they say that we have your personal data, and we know your passwords and all. So that kind of account hijacking has even become more common. So when you're using open source in cloud, it becomes even more important to first have your cloud secure, and then have your open source application as well secure, because otherwise it can lead to this account hijacking. Misuse of cloud platforms. I think already a lot of people have spoken about it. There have been a lot of DDoS attacks. Your credit card data is compromised. If you do not have a specific and very clear security protocols in place, if you do not know where my malware can be attacked, which softwares I am using, if you don't have the inventory of it, if you don't know if they are the latest versions or not, and if you do not know how to respond to an incident when it actually happens, what should I do? What is my incident response plan? Then probably this is where you are misusing your cloud platform. You're moving to the cloud, but then you're not using it to its full capacity. Warranties and IP infringement. This is something which we have seen a lot in the open source software. You use them, but you do not have a process in place to do the legal assessment of the application. Later on, you come to know, since there is no license attached to it, since it is open source, you don't tend to do a legal assessment. And then, if the open source is using any infringement code, then you would be responsible for it, because it's a shared responsibility between you and the open source or the cloud environment that you are using. Untracked use of software. In a lot of organizations, like Mohit was also telling right now, the developer would say, I use the open source because it was used in my previous organization, or I feel it easy to be used. But then, is it being tracked in the organization? I mean, did somebody just go ahead and deploy it in the cloud environment and you don't even know about it? So that kind of inventory processes, they are missing. And that leads to, we spoke about the challenges, we spoke about the risks. What should we do to prevent it? I covered it in some of the slides, but then I'll just take it step by step. First, trace the problems down to root causes, whether it is your cloud environment, whether it is your open source. What kind of challenges do you face? What kinds of problems are there? What is the threats that you see within your environment? You make a list of those. Threats. Look at what should be implemented, what controls should be implemented in order to ensure that those risks can be mitigated. That's one of the key things. Find out what was the root cause of doing it. Like many times what happens is there is a security incident, there is a security breach that happened, but we forget to see what was the root cause behind it, why that even happened. That's something which will be critical. Using machine learning, AI, ML, that's very important. You leverage the capability of machine learning, AI, ML. Look at the cloud analytics, look at user behavioral analytics, look at the usage analytics, look at how the people are using it, what is the threat vector right now, and be prepared accordingly for your environment. Do regular security audits. I think this is what is most critical, and I think Mohit also touched base upon it. What environment you have, what is your current environment? What kind of threats do you see? What threat vectors are there within your organization as of now in your cloud environment? What all open source you are using, and what are the access rights and how protected is my data? So if you can take care of those, I think that continuous monitoring and those security audits would definitely play a crucial role in making your organization secure. Identify and manage critical data. Any regulations that you look at, any data protection acts that you look at, whether it is GDPR, whether it is any other specific data protection act, it talks about identifying of data, and it's clear that until and unless you identify what you need to protect, until and unless you identify what is that crown jewel that I need to protect, you won't be able to develop the plan around it. So it's very important that you identify where is my critical data, what kind of information it is, how sensitive it is, and what level of protection is required to ensure that that data is protected. If you have encryption, if you have controls like securing your endpoints, I think that's where you would be able to protect your critical data. And that brings me to the next point, which I spoke about, implementing the endpoint security. So not just desktops, cloud accounts, but also if you're using BYOD and you're using VPNs, you're using public Wi-Fi's, how well you have your policies in place, how well you're doing the user behavioral analytics, how well you're protecting your environment would be the key over here. And some of those elements would be having encryption in place. Choose the best vendors. When it comes to cloud environment, you should ensure that the vendors that you are choosing for cloud environment, that is secure. Open source would be deployed on that cloud environment, but then the cloud environment in itself should be secure enough that it should alert me of all the kinds of threats that it sees within any software that is deployed in that environment. So what kind of network monitoring, what kind of backup, DR, the strategies, what kind of those strategies are available with the vendors, that's very important to know. And one of the aspects that I already spoke about, the incident response and recovery. So how well you identify the threats, risks identified with a particular application, the open source software that you're using in any application, with your cloud deployment in itself, the applications that are deployed on cloud. So how important, how nicely you have done that, that would really help in addressing those risks and bringing out that incident response plan and recovering it to the place where the organization turns from being cyber secure to cyber resilient. Review insider threats, and that's one of the critical aspects, because the conventional way of looking at organizations where people were seated in a cabin or in an office, in a premise which was monitored, has shifted to a remote working environment where people are working from their homes, and every house has become a data center for the organizations. They have become the data custodians. So it is very important that you look at the insider threats, you look at the people who have left the organization, whether that access has been revoked properly or not, whether all of those systems are secured, and the admin activities, they are being monitored or not. And one important thing which is really important for the organization would be the threat modeling. And while doing the threat modeling, it is very important that you understand what are the risks for my organization, what are the threats that I have for my organization, what are the assets that would have those threats, how do I implement various controls to ensure that those threats are mitigated. You would do this threat modeling for your environment. You should do the same thing for your cloud environment, and you should do the same thing for any open source that you're using. And one of the ways of doing this threat modeling, this is one of the sample ways how NIST would recommend doing a threat modeling. It's identifying your threats, what vulnerabilities it can exploit, which assets it can affect, and how can I mitigate that threat and vulnerability. What controls should I have in place to mitigate those threats and vulnerabilities? That's how you can design your own threat modeling. And it is also a very efficient way to understand the current threat landscape of your environment, to understand the various actors that are responsible, threat vectors, the threat actors in your environment, and then moving on to implementing the controls which give you more ROI and are even more secure for your environment. Governance through open source policy. You also need to have a policy in place which governs any use of open source, how it would be used, whether there will be a risk assessment conducted before using any open source in any environment. It could be your vulnerability assessment, it could be your legal assessment, risk assessment. You look at the known vulnerabilities, look at baselining the code, then using it within your environment. And again, inventory and documentation. Once you have the policy in place, it is important that you know which open source is being used, which version is being used, and have a complete inventory of it, just like you would have the inventory of any assets in your environment. And like I said, you know, you have a policy in place, you have the inventory in place. Even the installation of any open source in any environment, whether it is within your environment or in the cloud environment, it should go through a process. It should know that this is my whitelisted open source that I can implement or that I can install in my environment. Otherwise, it should not only authorized people should be allowed to have that kind of privileges to go and install or deploy the open source. And very importantly, the security testing. So if you look at the stats, 48% developers found that you know, if they have been doing scanning, they would be able to fix the code even before it exploit any vulnerability. So that's what is important. Having that mechanism of security testing, the static testing as well as the dynamic testing is very important. Having those security codes, having those checklists in place, having automated tools to run those reviews, and then assessing whether you really want to have, you are okay to go with that known vulnerability, or you want to maybe look at some other open source instead of the one that you have in place. And patch management, how frequently the open source is being patched, how frequently the open source patches are released, and how frequently you take them and implement them in your environment, whether you use the latest version and you patch them regularly or not. That should be tracked, just like we would monitor Microsoft or Adobe patches. We should do it similarly for these applications also, and these open source. Training, definitely, that is something which is really important. Like I said, every employee has become the custodian of information security. So it is very important that all of them are well aware of the latest trends. They know what is a phishing attack, how they should deploy a software, what security practices they should keep in place. And last but not the least, I leave you with this slide for open source software. Here are a few points that you should keep into mind. Whether the software is meeting my requirements, is it good for my role? Does it have a future? What kind of licenses it has? What kind of strategies it has for patching, for prerequisites? Am I choosing the right version? Similarly, when it comes to cloud strategy and for open source, you should first identify and catalog all open source and commercial code. You should put tools and processes in place to identify vulnerabilities. And last, use specialized tools to address risks and problems. With that, I would like to thank you all, and I'm open for any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Mithali. Great introduction into threat modeling. How do you mitigate? Much appreciate the insights and a well-prepared deck. Thank you. Do we have Prasanna now who can take his slides, please? Prasanna? You're on mute, Prasanna. Thank you.
Oh, so sorry. Yeah. So I think let me just share my screen and
yeah, we can hear you now. We can hear and see you.
Okay, done. So, am I? My slide deck is visible?
Nope, not yet.
No. Okay, just a second. Let me retry. Yeah, is it okay, right?
It's coming up now. Yeah, we can see it.
Yeah, I think, thank you, Varghese, hearing a lot of views from many of our experts today. So next 10, 15 minutes, I'll just bring up on my perspective, how I look at how the development is going to change, how our regulations, compliance going to change, right? Whatever we spoke today is very appreciable, and that's how we have lived in the last 20, 30 years, right? But when you look at any of those emerging technologies, right? Say example, I'll talk a lot about blockchain kind of a technology and how it's gonna really change most of our lives. So currently, if you let's take example banking as an ecosystem, right? So currently, Indian banks are looking for these kind of things. So some of the things are aligned with the theme of our whole thing, wherein we spoke about compliance, how do we take care of our data security, how do we develop better development, how open sources can be really helpful for any of those adoptions, right? So so these are all the things wherein most of the Indian banks are having challenges all around, right? Just a second. Yeah, so most of the things are around, say example, uptime of the applications, or you talk about data security, fraud management. One of the regulation of RBI is that any system goes down, it has to be reported within a definite time, either 2 hours or either 4 hours. So how do we bring on that security reporting? There are a lot of data handholding has to be done from one bank to another bank, or one bank to the regulator at the end of the day, based upon the type of reports around payment transactions, how many customers are being added. So that it's all manual data movement, right? Moreover, any fraud happens in my bank has to be reported to RBI within definite time, and the data internally available to other banks, so that they can take care of that fraudulent type data, right? Fraudulent customers, so that they should not onboard these kind of customers. So primarily the theme around overall banking challenge is around how do we have a better data. How do we have a better data around customers, right? Wherein we have a lot of bad assets. How do we have a data integrity or inter-system integrity? Or if you look at some of the fraud happens in the Indian ecosystem at branches, right? For LCPG, right? Nirav Modi's and all. So overall periphery, how do we secure the periphery? How do you secure endpoints? How do you secure the way we do it? Develop very, very important. And blockchain comes and says, I can really safeguard all of these things. So what happens all of a sudden? We spoke about so many compliances, we spoke about so many guidelines, we spoke about DevOps practices. And while blockchain comes and says, I am a foundation technology, I am not a disruptive technology which will come and plug and play in a mobile app or plug and play in your business model. I am a foundation technology and I will change everything all around you. I will change your regulations. I will change your compliances. I will change the way you develop. But that's the concept all about, right? Today, we might be having so many challenges and we might be having an answer of a blockchain, but blockchain is at a niche stage. It requires a lot of research, and this research will come or coming up from open source communities. You spoke about Ethereum is open source. You talk about a Bitcoin is open source, multi-chain, hyperledger, every blockchain fabric is at open source, right? That is very, very important for open source community come and build tomorrow's operating systems of a blockchain, right? Although some of the R3's Hyperledger has a paid version also, but that's an opportunity for everybody to come and change the way we do banking, healthcare, manufacturing, and agriculture, and so on. So going forward, if I take example of one ecosystem, right, which is a payment ecosystem. So in this payment ecosystem, say AEPS, UPI, or any of those payment ecosystem, so customer comes and does a transaction on a POS or e-com, right? And at the end of the day, this transaction is routed from acquiring to issuance through some kind of a MasterCard, Visa, intermediaries, which we have created last 30, 40 years, right? So some of the technologies, decentralized way of working this says that we don't need intermediaries. And we don't need so much of architecture, right? So many manual process out there, right? So the challenge with this current ecosystem is a dispute management, too much of reconciliation, too much of efforts around that. The settlement has to be done, a lot of manual interventions. So going forward, can we not create this banking ecosystem like this, where all of a sudden your compliances, regulations, controls, endpoint security comes down, because it's a thin architecture and gives a lot of adoption of a future-proof architecture, right? So what I mean to say that while we are working on our traditional decentralized architecture, makes sense for us to move on decentralized architecture. So all of a sudden your DevOps, DevSecOps, and many more things will be eased out. Why? Because blockchain offers these many things, right? Single source of a truth. Or it offers like how do we create a smart contracts so that inter-party handshakes should happen seamlessly without manual intervention. Although today we have APIs to integrate, but that also vulnerable, right? Your data is irreversible. The data which is written in a blockchain cannot be altered, right? Data security plays major role in any of the regulations, and with the blockchain, it eases out. It takes it to the next level. a multi-party trust, wherein most of the banks are now integrating with fintechs or other partners for co-lending, BNPL, various kind of opportunities coming in the banking fraternity. But we need to make sure how secure, data privacy, how the integrations are secure. And blockchain says, I will make sure that all the systems are on the same level, right? Why? Because it works on the same principles, right? It decentralized. It's not only single party will control, right? There are no operations, configurable access rights. So that's how blockchain offers in front of them. But today, the appeal for viewers, right, who are listening us, like developers, experts, corporates, academia, we need good number of people and the skill set in the blockchain, right? So that our technology get matured sooner or the later. We need a lot of challenges around blockchain today, around security, scalability, interoperability. How do we do that, right? So that's all we can bring on with a lot of research around open sources. Technology maturity is required. Today, whenever we develop anything, UPIs or any of the ecosystem, technologies are already mature, right? But the technology which was not matured in 16, 17, but now it is getting matured with almost billions of investment has happened. China, US, UK, everybody is investing a lot on this technology. It makes sense that at the India level also we do the investment and look at how do we bring on ease adoption. So I think in a nutshell, it's a foundational technology. It requires a lot of collaboration to bring on. Having an inform at central level, we have had our own blockchain strategy, but we need a blockchain group or a council which can give a lot of education, create a consensus mechanism, all the consortium kind of ecosystem. Say example, this slide is all about the banking ecosystem, right? Identify which are those use cases. Use case could be many more use cases, right? There could be every ecosystem, every use case in a bank is going to touch upon blockchain, right? Because the trust is needed, which was not there. So I think I have mentioned some of these use cases like cross-border, decentralized KYC, NFTs, DeFi, and many of these use cases are already in practice, right? May not be actual production, but CBDC, the one India is talking about, fraud management, how do we really have reduce those cycles of reporting of fraud, right? How do we have a less of a settlement and more of a clearance and settlement, payment lending use cases. Every use case is gonna go on blockchain. But what blockchain needs as of now from the community, it's all about collaboration, right? Apart from use case, bring on industry experts, companies like R3, Hyperledger coming in together. They have respective communities, but we need to work a lot around the need of infrastructure, scalability, data privacy, and how one blockchain talk to another blockchain, interoperability. We need to see how tomorrow's ecosystems. Today we are on mobility, today we are on web, tomorrow it will be on devices, right? IoT will come into picture, wearables will be doing the transactions, smart cars, smart houses, smart offices gonna be reality. So, and these entities will have their own digital identity. So how they will have some of those secure elements, how they will secure the data, do the transaction, right? So I think this is all need at this moment. So once again, I think collaboration is a key for overall blockchain adoption. Although we'll talk a lot about various use cases, right? We'll have a kind of a blockchain councils and blockchain labs at a bank level, healthcare level. But very, very important aspect I talk about, these are the well-known platforms like Ethereum, Hyperledger, R3s, US, and these platforms were open source one point in time. Now these platforms are making billions of business, right? So it's an opportunity for some of our Indian players also to create their own platforms, right? So that's an opportunity. So through this medium, I just wanted to say, while our other experts are guiding us about how do we take care of current architecture, current business processes, current business models, right? With DevOps, DevSecOps, and better security. I just wanted to give a view. How do we create a better maturity model around blockchain kind of a technology, which will really help to create better use cases, sustainable use cases, and a sustainable long-term architecture-based use cases where we'll not have a challenge around data privacy or security or interoperability, or you talk about scalability or any of the things which we talk today's regulation, right? Yeah, so thank you so much. I think great to be here. This is one of the depiction how current Aadhaar will go on blockchain. or how current KYC system, which is a CKYC or the way we do at a respective bank, how it is going to be a decentralized KYC. This is one of the projects we are driving at the Ministry of METI along with IDRBT and CDAC. Look forward, many more such use cases will come, but certainly being at open source, certainly being blockchain at a current level is yet to be matured so much. We need a lot of support. I think, thank you so much for inviting me here and to give some insights around blockchain and how blockchain is going to change today's mechanism. So thank you, Burgess, for hearing me out. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Prasanna. So very impressive. Wow, I've learned a few things today. How to make a better working model. We had Mitali mentioning how to make a better threat modeling and mitigate the risks. We had Mohit saying open source is here to stay and companies will adopt it. And we had Damon Horner to say it has happened before, it will happen again. We start our discussion with 30 minutes. We've got great insights today, right from morning discussion to now. I just want to have a first open question. This is great from individual points of view, but what is the message to a CISO? Let's say two CISOs of a bank, telecom, manufacturing, healthcare. Mitali, and starting with you. CISOs have been recently had a bad experience, and we saw some lovely photos for that, saying 31st was a tough one. But what are they adopting in the future? Would you advise CISOs to go and say, forget what happened, stick to the guns, go more open source, or saying no? Or we had a lovely point where it says, it's not if, in fact, we had Galok mentioning that it's not one versus the other, it's a balance. How do you strike that? Mitali, your opening comments.
Right. So, Burgess, I think, that would be very easy to say that, you cage everything out and, stop using anything. But then that's not how it would work, because open source is here to stay, and open source would be used in any application, whether it is cloud, whether it is on-prem. We are going to use it. So I think most important would be how we are planning our defenses. So that's what will be crucial right now, whether you have your defenses in place or not. First, are you getting that right risk assessment and threat assessment of your landscape, getting those right insights, whether it is AI, ML, whatever technology you use, are you getting that right insight? And even if you have the right controls in place, you have identified, you have put in those defenses in place, you are still bound to be hacked, you are still bound to be compromised. I don't see any organization, if somebody says we have not been compromised, I think it definitely means that they probably don't know when and how much they have been compromised. That's how I feel about it. And so it's very important, what is the defense mechanism, what is the incident response and the business continuity plan that you have in place. So let's say if you are compromised, how would you come back to the normal? How would you identify it, detect it, and respond and recover to it? What would be that time when you would have your business operations back to normal and have that resiliency in place? And once you have done that, you have that in place, do you also test that? I mean, not just waiting for the actual breach to happen. Do the people even know what they need to do if they are compromised? So I think that would be the key thing.
Thanks, Mitali. How are you planning defenses? Doesn't matter what you use, how well have you designed, planned, and tested it. Mohit, over to you. What's your message for CISOs? And also, do you see the adoption? You come from a telecom and multiple industries. Do you see adoption in a particular industry more like telecom or healthcare? Or we had EdTech, EduTech, healthcare, different techs. Where do you see the adoption more or less?
Yeah, thanks, Burgess. So just to add to what Mitali was saying, open source is here to stay for sure, right? And if you look at for the message for CISOs, I would say 2016, 14, 15, I would say. When I used to talk to the CIOs and CISOs and I asked them, do you consume open source? And the answer was, I don't use open source at all. I have no open source in my environment. I do not consume it. So that was the first denial you could sense. And the moment they, we actually went down to them and showed them exactly that, a simple question like, do you use OpenSSL? And the answer is yes, right? So that's the first thing. So from denial stage, the CIOs have come on to the stage of saying acceptance that yes, we do use open source, right? Which is important. Now, like I shared earlier, and Damien also shared earlier, and Prasanna was also talking about it, is that a process, like Burgess, you mentioned, a process has to be there. You can't say, I don't want to use open source, because if you look at the last 1 decade, the quantum of open source consumption has exponentially grown up, right? And if you look at the consumption in terms, look at IoT, smart cities, you look at healthcare, you look at telecom, like Deepa was mentioning about Open RAN, right? Open RAN is one of the use cases. Open GGS is another use case where the Open GGS is being consumed, right, in virtual environments or in practical environments. So it's not that it's going to be sticking on to one industry. If you look at the education industry, 60-70% of whatever they're consuming is I would say 80%, or I would say 78 to 80% is open source consumption. So going back to that book of 80-20 principle, you'll have a 73-27 or 80-20 or maybe 75-25. But that consumption of open source is there across. So I won't say it's only in specific domains, but the domains which are taking a heads up in terms of consumption happen to be the banking and financial services, which is heavy, right? I know at least in India and globally across in Southeast Asia, a number of financial institutes which have actually migrated. Even our GST network or our Bombay Stock Exchange is focused on open source. They don't plan to use commercial technologies as compared to open source, right? So that's there to stay, right? And healthcare uses a lot of open source. The SCADA environment is using a lot of open source right now.
Thank you, Mohit, for giving an industry-wide perspective. Damon, over to you. You mentioned how you have a proposal in place to help companies. But what are the design principles that you advise a CIO or a CISO to base their open source security framework? How would they go adopting it?
Yeah, how would they go adopting it? I think just like the others have said, there's no avoiding open source at this point. It's there to stay. It's here to stay. And that's a good thing. And it brings so many different benefits with it. My advice would be to get visibility, get your arms around what open source you have in your environment. And then, as Jeff was saying, to make sure that that is kept up to date, because by staying up to date, you're only dealing with the most recent small changes rather than major shifts in certain libraries that have ripple effects across other parts. And building the process and so that the maintenance of your libraries is there as part of day-to-day development. There's nothing free in this life, and when you take in an open source library, you take in the responsibility to make sure you're informed about it. And that means staying up to date. It means staying aware of any known vulnerabilities in it, and even contributing to fixing those if they come along, and giving back to the community, as it were, and being notified automatically when there are issues. So I would suggest that stakeholders or those in positions, leadership positions, don't fear this. Instead, they embrace it and adapt their processes to make sure that they don't get burnt.
So stay up to date and don't get burnt. Prasanna, I'd like to invite you. And this is re-quoting you in a different nice way. Prasanna, your opening comments in terms of, we had Mitali mentioned about it's here to stay, but get your defenses. Mohit mentioned it's across industries. Damon says it's patch update and don't get burnt. Prasanna, how do you go about designing this? Prasanna? Hello, Prasanna, you there? Okay, Damon, I'll take it on to you since you were last connection. We all spoke about nice successes and what's happened today, but it's always failure who gives us the most learning examples. Talk to me about a case study where a company has gone through failure, got attacked, got defaced, or got major issues, and a case study quickly how you helped them turn around. And what's a lesson in there for CIOs and CISOs who are listening today?
So I was speaking to one of our sales engineers recently about one of our customers' approaches to open source, and he told me a story about a large bank that had discovered a vulnerability in one of their libraries, and they had gone through and replaced it everywhere. And this was a major project for them. It involved a lot of pain. They spent a lot of money on it, and afterwards they realized that they weren't actually using the component in the library that was vulnerable, and they could have completely avoided that. So I guess the lesson there is Usually your response will be to stay up to date and to get rid of vulnerabilities if you know they're in your environment. But there are some times when you can use that extra level of knowledge to save yourself some time and stay focused on the most important things. And I hear that type of story fairly regularly from customers or through our sales engineers and our salespeople who are talking to customers about how they're approaching things at the minute. And yeah, this type of situation comes up regularly where people will jump to, they will over address the problem when they could be a lot more tactical and spend that time and resource elsewhere in something more beneficial rather than just a box ticking exercise to remove a library that actually isn't causing them any pain.
Thank you so much. Nitali, your perspective, you said design your framework, keep your defenses ready. It's so nice in principle. We know CISOs go through a hard time. Sorry, I got put on mute. Mithali, you were mentioning design your frameworks, test them, get your defenses. It's so great in theory, but tell me an example where you potentially have seen your company, other companies you have helped out, go through the learning curve, and what are common mistakes CISOs make in this?
Sure. So I think there have been multiple cases, and yes, it is easy said than done. Definitely. I mean, it's easy to say that conduct the risk assessment, but I think that's one of the critical things which I see missing in any organization that we have worked with or our customers. Like recently, one of our customers got compromised with the Kronos attack. So they had this Kronos attack, but one of the key elements that I would say we helped them do was having their backup and strategy in place, because that's where we had done a risk assessment of their environment and found that they had certain applications, they were using certain applications which were on cloud, and there were other applications as well. So moving in from identifying their applications, having identified which were the mission critical applications, to coming to their business continuity and disaster recovery plans, testing of those plans, that was there, which we did in place, and that covered the backup restoration drills as well, having those incident responses. And that was the reason why even with that Kronos attack, their data was saved. They were able to move back to the manual process till the time the Kronos thing was solved. So they were able to move as usual with their processes. In other cases, when the pandemic struck us, for our organization itself, SDG, we had certain measures in place, the business continuity and the risk assessment processes in place, because of which we were able to transition from the office to the remote working in just I think in 2 weeks of time, and there were no business disruptions. All the employees were able to manage from home. We had those security tools into place. So I think one of the key things that is missing within organizations, wherever we have done the assessments or wherever we are doing the consulting as assignments, what we see in the industry is the risk assessment. People don't even know what is it that they need to protect. People don't know what is the threat vector of their organization. They don't know what kind of control should be designed. And they don't know what are the actual tools that they should have. They would just have boxes in place which are not being used or which have not been integrated together. Rather, I think it's important that you design controls and have those controls which really mitigate risk and are even cost effective.
Thanks, Nitali. Design controls, have them in place and checked. Mohit, what's the roadmap for this ahead? You have a lovely infographic which showed the CI/CD pipeline. How do you helping companies make a roadmap from their perspective? Is it just a point-in-time service, or is it a continuous managed outsourcing? What are successes for which clients come to you for?
So Burgess, the first thing we always do is, I'm using the word eat your own shit first, right? So typically, we actually have deployed this in-house first. So it's not that something we are going to be, procrastinating and telling people that you got to do it because that's the way, because we are the consultant. So we've actually deployed this in-house. We have our own repos in place, we're using a public repo, for example, right? But then we built up the entire process, which is around the CI/CD or a DevSecOps side, right? Contrast on one side is actually the agents are deployed for us. The contrast agents are deployed for us on our developers' machines, so that we are able to quickly look into the vulnerability at an early stage rather than saying, my product is ready for delivery, I'm going to test it out there. So We are doing this stage 1, which is in person right now. That is starting from day 1 itself. Now, when we talk to organizations, we have a couple of small, I would say mid-sized organizations and large organizations which are consuming our technologies on the DevSecOps process. So we have been, it's an ongoing process. We started with the repo, we started with Contrast, we started with the other technologies or tools like simple VA and PT tools which they need to get deployed. But it's an ongoing process. It's not something which is stagnant. So as a consulting organization or as an organization working, we actually have customers who are going in a staged manner, stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3, because you can't just deploy. So basic tools of CI/CD, like say, for example, they have a ticketing system like Jira on the other side, or let's assume that they also have already an existing SIM tool like Splunk. So we do integrate the entire details coming in from Contrast into a Splunk, right? So that continuously keeps on flowing up and down. So it's a complete process. It's practically deployed. It's not something that I'm prophesizing and saying that we don't have it. One of our large use cases is in India. One of the large software organizations, I can't take names, we have an NDA, Damien is aware of it, Jeff is aware of it. But they have actually deployed this entire process right now, and they're pretty strong and gung-ho about the DevSecOps and the CI/CD.
Thanks, Mohit. Damien, we heard about supply chain attacks and a big brand was affected, and I'm sure we'll see more of that. Your opening slide was, it's happened, it'll happen again. Where would you forecast the next supply chain attack to happen from this perspective?
I would not want to make any forecast about where the next one will happen. I mean, we see all different areas of software development are prone to attack, and yeah, I don't have any good answer on that one. What I would say is assume that it will happen to you somewhere in whatever software you're using, and get yourself prepared for it, and think about right across your entire development life cycle, right from, people talk about shifting left. So get the information in the hands of the developers so that you can avoid whatever that next attack might be. Have your developers write better code, use better libraries, check for, in an automated way, check for vulnerabilities, and do that at every stage, right through to the production environments where you could also be blocking incoming attacks using technologies such as RASP. So I think it's important to think about security right across your pipeline. Protect yourself where you can, and if you're not doing anything right now, then start with small incremental steps and start to make small improvement right along the whole chain. But in terms of predicting what type of software is most likely to be targeted next, I don't have any crystal balls, unfortunately.
Okay, Mitali, Damon is not a crystal ball, but what type of attacks will happen?
I'm with Damon. I think you don't know, because everybody had medical insurance, but nobody knew that, Corona or COVID will come and everybody will move from on-prem to home, and, there'll be a different shift that you'll have to do. So I think with remote working, data breaches definitely are there to stay. That's what I can say. Other than that, I am of the same opinion that we don't have a crystal ball. We should just be prepared for anything. And it's very important we have our employees trained to identify whether it's a phishing attack or not, because that's also there to stay. So data breaches, and one of the key ways of doing that would be phishing attacks, because you keep on getting mails saying that, you have this free offer, you have this and that, and people tend to click on it. So making every employee custodian of information security, that would be the key area. And other than that, I think try to be as much safe as possible.
Try to be as much safe as possible, clearly. So that's great perspective. In terms of the biggest problem, Mitali, is the advent of tech is going so fast. How would you think CISOs and CIOs have to keep themselves updated? I mean, it's okay to hire a company. How do they?
So I would say, like we say, continuous monitoring of your controls, and like ISO or any standard would say, continuous improvement of your processes. Similarly, I think that also applies to your own self. So continuous learning would be the key. You cannot just sleep and think that, okay, I know so many things about, I know OWASP top 10, so I am probably secure. I have my security policies in place. You need to keep reinventing the wheel. You need to keep on looking at what new threats are coming in, what all new things would be there in place. So as and how they come, you need to have that kind of, I would say, from that conventional security model to a more agile security model is what you need to transition to, where the security would not just be that you say that today I'm going to block USB in my laptops or systems and it will be secure. No, or I just say I will have NAC in place, I will have SOC in place, it will all be secured. No. So you need to keep on reinventing the wheel. You need to keep on having more security measures in place. Every day there will be a new threat. You need to keep yourself well educated. Have those intel wherever it is available. Stay hungry and stay foolish for more and more information. Keep gathering it and keep using that information in a way that it can be useful for you and your organization.
Stay hungry, stay foolish. Don't just sleep and say, I know what's top 10. Well summarized, Mithali. Mohit, with the advent of 5G, we had Deepa Jagindra mentioning 5G and a great talk by her in the morning. Would the advent of 5G, Mohit, get more attacks and hence more attention to the space?
That's again, no crystal balls, but I'll say, it's better to be proactive than reactive. So,
and how does one go about that? 5G is here to stay.
Yeah, in a sense, like I won't say it's going to be. It's not an easy task of going into 5G, but at the same time, of course, the way the 5G deployment keeps on happening, you'll have issues for sure. You'll have people who are going to be dedicated to get the system down, right? So the better way out would be to understand how the 5G works, and then to figure out and plumb in, I would say, the vulnerabilities which are exposed. So I'm sure no crystal ball, but yes, it's going to be an uphill task. But my only advice would be proactive rather than reactive. I mean, you're an ex-telecom guy yourself, so you understand that, right? So
hence the question.
Better to be proactive.
Hence the question.
Yes.
It's better to be proactive. Damien, starting from you, I'd like a 1 minute summary from all three of you all. Damien, you, Mithali, and then ending with my friend Mohit. Damien, your 1 minute summary of today's sessions, great outlooks, great positions, great presentations. But what's your overall summary? And if you had to tell Sashi next year, I'll be here, same time, what would you be looking at without crystal gazing?
Well, I have to say up front that I've enjoyed contributing and taking part this morning. It's been good fun and very informative for me. Your comment a few minutes ago about CISOs, what should they be doing? I think they should be engaging with industry through forums like this, and talking and contributing to those as well. What would I be looking for next year? Well, I'd love to think that we will have advanced the state of the art in terms of open source software and its usage. I'd love to see more awareness of runtime usage within open source libraries. So it's fine just to say that I've got these libraries and I need to be aware of them, but understanding which parts of those libraries I think is a really critical piece that would help shift the needle in terms of how companies address their open source vulnerabilities. So I'd love to see advances like that. There's lots of different things going on in the open source space. So that's one of the areas that I'm particularly interested in.
Thank you, Damien. Hope to see you at the same time on same discussion next year. Mithali, your closing comments, a minute and a half.
So I have been associated with open source from last, I think, 4 or 5 years. So I have been attending this event on and on. And my main objective of attending this event is primarily to understand the new trends, the emerging technologies when it comes to open source, because that's something that we are using day in and day out. And it will be here. Even next year, we'll be talking about it. I think more working sessions towards open source, how it is being used. That would be helpful because open source is increasing every day, and cloud deployment is increasing every day. So I think for any CISO, I have my own, like people say 2C, 3C and all that. So I have my 4C methodology. And that is continuous improvement through continuous monitoring, continuous auditing, and continuous learning. So that's what I follow in my organization as well as in my life as well, that you need to keep on improving yourself. And the only way after a certain time is moving away from just those conventional books to attending such kinds of webinars, seminars, interacting with industry peers, industry experts to learn what is happening in the industry, and then taking it back and adopting it within your organization, so that you know whatever you are teaching, you're preaching, you're also teaching, you're also doing it. You know that this is how it is being done, and then wherever you see that this is not working out, you keep on improving it and making changes to yourself as well as your family.
Whatever you're preaching, you're teaching the 4 C's, and stay hungry, stay foolish. Thank you, Mithali, for your great comments. Mohit, my friend, your last comments on the topic.
Just a simple thing is, CIOs and CISOs need to stop getting transactional and get more into technology. Because that's the reason I'm saying is because whatever interactions I've been having with with the CIO and CISO community is they get actually dragged into transactional level, and they don't get time to focus on the major issues which is there. What I look forward for 2023 is going to be, of course, like Mithali was mentioned, Jimmy mentioned about, how the open source is going to move. So consumption is increasing. It's not that it's decreasing. So next year, maybe when we come across back at 37 million, maybe 73, you don't know, right? But the quantum is growing exorbitantly. Organizations, I've been talking to organizations, even in our organization, we actually put 20% of our time for team members to contribute back to the OSS community. The reason being is that's the only way to make that happen, right? So you will see a drastic change happening in a couple of years. Is consumption is going to go from 37 to 73. I don't know the numbers, but yes, it's going to increase exponentially. But also contribution towards open source is increasing.
Thanks so much. Clearly, get more strategic. Don't get tactical. Thank you so much, Mohit, for your closing comments. Thanks, Mithali. Thanks, Damien. Thanks, Prasanna. Shashi, we had a great discussion. Back to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bharat. Thank you so much for chairing this session, and thanks to all the speakers. So end of the day, we can say that open source key for digital democracy. So ladies and gentlemen, let's close with this command. And I appreciate the kind of speakers as given their input. Look forward to a digital democracy with open source. Have a nice time. Look forward to the next event. Take care. All the best.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks everyone. Thank you.